10th, 2024 is called to order.
Yeah.
We have minutes. Have you had a chance to look at the minutes?
Yes, and I make a motion that we approve the minutes.
Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So that passes, and we are to item 3. The zoning case, ZAC 2024-00005. And
Okay.
now you're on.
Yes, ma'am.
You can show us your PowerPoint presentation.
Well, I didn't bring a PowerPoint presentation, but I did. You should have some photographs in your packet. So we'll take a look at those when we get to it. But I did, respond generally to your comments. I think you sent an email to, and we can
Yeah,
talk.
I asked if there were any pictures.
Right, so I went ahead and created these for this purpose. And then, I think there was a couple other questions we could deal with about off-premise sign and nonconformity, I think were the other two questions you had asked in that email.
Yeah, because we have a whole ordinance for billboards.
Well, so,
Off-premise with drawings that is very good. And if we're going to mess with it, we should put some more very good drawings and do a very quality job so people can see what we're doing.
yeah. So we can get into that. But so, like you'd mentioned, this is ZAC 2024-5. The city is the applicant. This is a zoning amendment. It's a proposed amendment to basically, amend the sign regulations, for the city. The ZAC did, hear this case. What was the date? July 2nd. And they voted 4-0 to recommend approval of the ordinance to the city council. And so I guess what I'll do is just kind of go through here real quick and just talk about the highlights of what we're changing and kind of give you a little bit of background too. I think you probably remember about 3 years ago, I think it was, that we kind of quickly adopted this new sign ordinance. And so we've been, living with the sign ordinance for the last couple years, learning a little bit about how, the deficiencies and kind of things we need to fix. And so, we tried to address that here. It created a lot of variances for different types of signs. And so, but I'll go ahead and mention about the off-premise sign now, because in that ordinance, basically what we did is, we said that we sort of eliminated all the off-premise stuff, basically. And so,
Good.
yeah, and so basically, all not off-premise signs, and it's been the case since I think 92 or 94 or something like that, that all off-premise signs in the city were legal non-conforming, and they are to this day. So if you see, a billboard, it's a legal non-conforming sign, off-premise sign.
It's the only time we might wish to be hit by a tornado.
Exactly, exactly. So, excuse me. So, but so what we did here, we have these areas of special aesthetic character. And so within those areas, you can't put up pole signs. And so, pole signs would, off-premise signs sort of fit into that category, but they're limited in size. I have to look exactly what the dimension is. I think it's maybe 40, 60 square feet, something like that. So, yeah, but you wouldn't be able to put up an off-premise sign because, a pole sign would have to be on-premise, advertising the commercial entity that's on site, so basically, yeah, off-premise signs are legal non-conforming that exist, and you can't build a new one.
Good.
It'd have to be an on-premise sign advertising for an entity that's on site. And even then, pole signs are limited to where they can be placed based on those areas of special aesthetic character. And so there's a whole list of them in here that are defined. I think most of the design review districts, principal streets, throughout the city, interstates throughout the city, basically you can't put pole signs up in a lot of places.
Yeah, and probably we need to add Green Springs Highway since we're doing those
I
two.
think it's probably on this list.
It's not.
Is not?
I've read this thing through several times, and if it's here,
Well, that's something we could certainly do.
well, because of the fact that the city is doing the streetscape projects on
Sure.
either side of the highway.
Yeah, we're
to
making
try
that
to-
investment.
Yeah, that's a big investment, and to have it not be area of special.
Yeah, I don't see it on there.
It's not on there.
Yeah, we'll add Green Springs.
From
I think-
University Boulevard to Valley Avenue, I think is the extent of it
I got you.
nowadays.
Okay, well, so I guess, you know, like I say, just kind of creating a little bit of context, like I say, about 3 years ago, we redid our sign ordinance. And, you know, primarily because of that Reed versus Gilbert case, you know, worrying about content-based requirements. And so, you know, we had a consultant, Dr. Amanda Laker is an attorney that, you know, specialized in writing ordinances, works for Washington University in St. Louis. And so we kind of followed some of their guidance, you know, in developing this ordinance so that we would make sure that it's not content-based and we wouldn't fall afoul of, you know, the Supreme Court case. And so, you know, we did that in a little bit of a hurried fashion. And so we always intended to come back and update the ordinance. And so we, like I say, we've lived with it for a couple years, we've learned, and so we've made these adjustments based on, you know, what we've seen over those intervening years. And so you'll see that, you know, we've added a couple of definitions, you know, for like a cornice sign, directory sign, historic marker, historic sign. We've added a definition for graffiti that is in line with our city code. We did add a couple of streets, you know, to those scenic corridors, you know, Richard Arrington, 20th Street North and South. We will add Green Springs based on our meeting today. I think that's a good add. You know, we added 41st Street South and North over there in Avondale and 3rd Avenue West as well.
So can we go backwards to the definitions?
Sure.
Since that's first. And I noticed that roof signs are crossed out in item 2. Does that mean we're no longer going to allow people to put signs on the roofs of buildings, kind of like the giant ad that we have?
Yeah, roof signs are not allowed. Yeah, I believe I think there's a prohibited list in here on the back. And I believe roof signs are listed as a prohibited sign. You know, it's, we can get into that in a minute. But yeah, roof signs have been prohibited for some time, I believe.
Well, they're hard to get rid of.
Sorry?
They're hard to get rid of.
Yeah,
And item
Yeah.
4, attached sign, it says it can be above or below a canopy.
correct.
Is that on the wall of the building, on the facade of the building, above or below a canopy?
Yeah, it would, you know, some folks attach them to the canopy. I know, like, and so that's an example, Chase Bank on the corner of 4th Avenue and 20th Street. So they have a canopy that's over their doorway, and then the sign is on top of the canopy. It's not technically attached to the building. And so, you know, we feel like, you know, it makes sense to allow them to do that. And so, yeah, so you might have, and, you know, like a hotel in particular, you know, might have lobby above it or something like that. Sometimes they're below the canopy if it's tall enough. You know, you see it typically in a lot of urban environments. I don't know, I think I have an example of that in the photographic example of one that's existing in the city. But yeah, so we felt like, you know, attached signs are not just attached to the building. Sometimes they're attached to a canopy. Sometimes they're attached to an awning. You know, and maybe they're applique or something like that. Maybe it's a painted detail. But one of the things that I think it's important to mention is within the attached sign regulation here, regardless of how many signs they have, they still have to stay under the 6%, right? So attached signs are limited to 6% of the facade, up to 150 square feet, and they can't be more than 50% of the width, right? So if somebody comes in and say, I want to put an attached sign up here, maybe I want to do a canopy sign, maybe I want to do one attached to the building, maybe I want to have one attached to an awning. Okay, fine, but they can't be more than that 6% or more than 150 square feet, you know, and it can't be more than 50% of the width of the building.
Okay, so, but that item 4 says, the end of it, or a sign applied to a canopy,
Correct.
either above or below the canopy. So it says the sign is applied to the canopy, but then it says it's above or below the canopy.
But it's attached to the canopy, so the canopy cantilever's out, And then think about like the Lyric sign, for example. I don't know if you can, think about the Lyric sign. It's actually a marquee, which is slightly different, but they look similar, because the marquee is going to be grander, it's going to be bigger, a theater, Alabama Theater's marquee sign, but Lyric has one. And so it's really a marquee sign, but I could call it a canopy just for this example. But so that sign projects out at a 90-degree angle from the building, and then there's lettering on top of it that's written out Lyric. And so it's attached to the canopy. And in some locations, that'll be attached below the canopy, it's typical, it's fairly typical, especially in urban environments, where you're trying to direct people to an entrance or something like that.
Okay, I was having trouble
Yeah,
visualizing.
and there's some pictures in here, if you want to take a look, there's, let's see.
Well, Outback might be what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's on here, I think. I think that's, and so, like, you have the attached awning sign, I don't know, it was at the 4th page, I guess, there's an attached awning sign example, where you have the awning, but then you just have the First Horizon applique on the front of the canopy. But once again, anything that's appliqued on the canopy or above or below, anything that's appliqued on an awning above or below the canopy would be part of that calculation for an attached sign. So it's not like you'd have 3 separate signs that could all be the same size. They'd still have to fit under that size constraint, if that makes sense.
Okay, so the definition of an awning is where? And the definition of a canopy?
I'm sorry?
What are the definitions of a canopy and an awning? I don't see.
We didn't include that. We could, I think.
Well,
Basically.
maybe we could, because the average person on the council is not a sign company owner. And
Sure.
therefore, we don't know all of the terminology that a sign expert would know. So I always look at things that you give to us as, if a normal person reads it, are they gonna have any idea what you're talking about?
Right. And that's why we did the photos, right? To
Yeah.
kind of help figure
Well,
that part out.
drawings and photos do help.
Yeah, sure. I agree.
And I realize I've gone all over the place. Do y'all want to go page by page in this thing, or how would you like? Because I've read over it a number of times and I still have questions.
Well, I do appreciate the question about the roof sign. That's another one that's not specifically spelled out.
Defined.
What a roof sign is, so that may be helpful.
Yeah, a roof sign.
Yeah, I can define that.
Things we don't want.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And the cornice sign, I guess, takes the place of the roof sign.
Well, I guess in a way, I mean, to me, it's an attached sign, but it's unique because it's only for buildings of a certain height. And so that's something that's interesting about this. So that's one of the items, that we amended in here is the cornice. We created a cornice sign section. And so it lays out, where and when you can have a cornice sign. So the building has to be 125 feet tall to have a cornice sign.
Like the shipped.
Exactly. And then, so you see that example on
So that's a cornice sign.
that's correct.
So,
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
but see, the average person isn't going to know what a cornice
Right. And the
sign
cornice,
is.
of course, is the top of the building, it's kind of the parapet. Oftentimes I'll have some architectural detail. But yeah. And so, but the point though is, in the past, we really haven't had any guidance on how and when somebody can build a cornice sign, and so, this puts some requirements in place. Number one, it has to be 125 feet tall. So you can't slap a cornice sign just on any building. It's a prominent building. And then, it limits the size of it, both, the width, the cornice, and then the square footage of it. And then also who can be displayed up there, so it's really for either the building owner or a primary tenant. It's not just anybody.
Alexander Shannara.
Exactly. Yeah, right. Exactly. So, so this is the first time we've established some guidelines for cornice signs. In the past, we just kind of been winging it a little bit, to be honest with you.
Okay.
You know, we just been treating them like an attached sign, and so that's a little challenging. So,
Okay, so back to the question for the committee. Do y'all want to go page by page and just see if anybody has any questions on each page, or?
yeah, I was gonna go through and just kind of highlight the stuff that we've added. And
Okay,
then,
let's do that.
yeah, so, let's see, so we mentioned the definitions, we added a couple of those, I'm using the wrong terminology, let me make sure I got the wrong, scenic corridors, we've added some of those scenic corridors. We're gonna add Green Springs to that. We're gonna add those definitions you mentioned, both roof sign and canopy. And then, when you get to attached signs, section 5, you'll see that, you know, this is where you've added canopies or awnings, you know, as a location where you can place an attached sign. And there's some, you know, requirements on the next page that you'll see highlighted in red, underscored.
So, on what page? I'm lost.
I don't think these have page numbers, I'm sorry. But if you go to section 5, attached signs, I think it's the first section, or actually, well, nearly, it's the first section that deals with sign requirements after the definitions.
I'm still lost in the definitions.
Well, turn the page.
Well, okay, but I have some questions about some of your definitions, so do we want to go in order, or do we?
That's up to
wanna-
you. If you want me just to go through it, we can go through it and we can come back, or we can stay in that section if you like.
Well, I just wanted to ask about historic signs.
Okay, let's do that.
And it's number 18
Yes, ma'am.
on some page number.
Right.
And it says an attached marquee or projecting sign that was original to the building or placed on the building for at least 50 years.
Right.
So does this include those faint painted-on signs that are on old buildings that you can barely see anymore, but someone might want to revive them?
Potentially, yeah.
But they're sometimes the whole side of the building.
Yeah,
So
I
if we
mean-
have limitations as to how much of a building can be covered with a sign, then how are we going to deal with this if someone finds, you know, they uncover their building and get down to the original brick wall and it has drink something? And it's the whole side of the building. Are we going to allow those to be revived because of the fact that they were there sometime in the past? I mean, very
Don't-
few of us are gonna know if they're 50 years old or not.
Right,
Yeah, they would have to be able to demonstrate that, yeah. But, and so here's an example of one that, where this fits in is, Alabama Theater. You know, Alabama Theater has the big marquee on Third Avenue, but then they added another, kind of vertical, blade sign on 19th Street. And that one was actually a historic sign, and so it had been taken down at one point, but they wanted to, you know, memorialize that, bring it back. I think they got a grant to actually build it, but it required several variances, you know, and so those are the kinds of signs we're thinking about. There are some of those painted signs, I think, that would potentially fit this. The only real limitation in here is that it can't be any larger than the original, and that it limits that they can't be a roof sign. You know, I think you probably remember
The barbers.
Barber had that sign on the top of
And there
whatever
are
that
people
building.
that want it to come back.
And there may be, but according to this, they wouldn't be allowed to do that. Right.
No, nobody, the owner doesn't wanna put it back, it's just
Yeah, people,
nostalgia.
exactly, yeah.
Well, so on that same page where the historic signs are, historic markers, those are the standard state-provided
That's
historic
correct.
markers.
Yeah.
And,
Those are the types of signs that we're talking about here. Yes, ma'am.
okay, and then just a small thing, we have facade, item 12.
Yeah.
And then we have frontage, and then we have facade again. And I was thinking, if we're going in alphabetical order, our two facades should
I
be
gotcha.
adjacent to one another.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that's a good idea.
So, but the historic signs, the old, you know, things that were painted on the building can be painted back, but it has to be like what it was.
It has to be the original, exactly, and then they have to be able to demonstrate that it's been there for 50 years, and the historic preservation manager would make that determination. It can't be any larger than the original, and
Don't
it
we
can't be a
have
roof sign.
Don't we have a protection for some of those, historic advertisements that are in the downtown historic district? Like, you know,
The whiskey,
it's been my understanding for a long time that if someone has one of those on the side of their building, that they're not allowed just to remove it or paint over it.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I would have to check with Carla or Hannah on that.
I mean, that's a consideration because, you know, in the example you guys are talking about where, somebody uncovers it, you know, and say they don't want to revive it, they want to do the opposite. They
Right.
wanna
pressure
remove
wash
it.
it off.
Yeah, I was under the understanding that you couldn't just do that, that you would have to obtain some sort of special exception, or, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to check with Hannah and Carla, our historic preservation folks.
Okay,
I don't think that would be something that would be in the zoning ordinance. So yeah, I'd have to check with her
okay.
or them.
That would be good to know, though.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't heard that before. So that's kind of news to me, but that doesn't mean, that it's not true.
Okay, so marquee sign on, which is number 20.
Yeah.
You know, I always read these descriptions and think, could I draw it from what has been written here? And I can't.
Yeah, well, the marquee sign is, you know, like the Alabama Theater sign on Third Avenue.
Yeah, but
That-
you can't put that in the definitions.
No.
I mean, we need to, I mean, the definitions to me need to be more specific so that a person could actually read it and say, yeah, that's the kind of sign I want to request, or that's what I need. You know, I mean, I read this and I go, well, okay, it's perpendicular to and it's located on the front facade of a building, just like every other sign. And then marquee signs often have neon lettering, you know, but I still don't know exactly what it looks like. I guess that's why I asked for pictures.
Yeah.
I would just like to see more robust descriptions that actually describe what the sign looks like. Because I'm
Okay.
sure I'm not the only one reading this that doesn't know a lot about signs. Surely not. Anyway, if we can look at
Yeah, I can beef that up.
somewhere in the wide world, some architectural,
Yeah, I have some definitions in a previous document that I think would, I sort of trimmed it back a little bit.
okay, and 25 tenant.
Mhm.
A tenant is the same as a use? That seems very peculiar to me. It says a tenant is a use located in a multi-use building or shopping center.
Yeah,
Tenant is a use?
A business.
yeah. You could say a business located in, yeah. It's just the entity, yeah.
I'd rather say an entity, but a use, because you know, we talk about uses in zoning all the time, and a use and a tenant are normally, that's not the definition of a tenant, is that he's a use. Anyway, that one just bothered me a little.
Okay.
Just because in zoning, a use,
Yeah, but you could have multiple uses in a building, you know, and they can be different, you know, and I think that's the whole point is, you know, these are multi-tenant buildings, you know, multi-purpose buildings, multi-use buildings, shopping centers. And so, yeah, I think that it
let's
goes,
just find another word.
Yeah, we can do that, yeah, that's not a problem. But that's all it is, because in the directory sign, I think we use the term tenant, and so you can have the tenants of the building listed in a directory sign, so.
And that makes sense.
Sure.
You can't have the uses listed, because it's like retail is a use. So, okay.
Okay.
So as we're plowing along here, does anybody have any questions on any of these pages that we're leaving?
So with, tenant, are we gonna change the word use?
We will,
Okay.
yeah.
That was a little confusing, honestly. Well, not confusing, it was just unclear.
Okay, and y'all are agreeable to adding Green Springs Highway from
Yeah, I think we
University
should.
Boulevard to Valley Avenue, which is all of Green Springs Highway that exists anymore.
Mhm.
There isn't any other.
Okay,
And there may be other council members who have streets in their districts that they have done work on or that the city has done work on that maybe we've forgotten about. So it might be that there might be some others that people, want to add. Because these areas of special aesthetic concern, those were created when we did the billboard ordinance originally, the
That's right.
off-premise sign ordinance.
that's correct.
And I recall that council members back then, I wasn't on the council, but, different council members had streets in their districts that they thought were important and wanted to have added to the areas, the scenic corridors or areas of special aesthetic concern.
Question.
Yes.
So, I see that Third Avenue West is added there. That's significant, and I think, putting it on the list is appropriate and in line with, a lot of discussions that we've had, in various forms and fashions. However, I'm wondering, like how this plays out, because if you designate Third Avenue West under current circumstances as a scenic corridor, I think there's a lot of, attributes that don't match. So like, I would imagine if you designated a scenic corridor, there's going to be a lot of things within that corridor currently that are non-conforming.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, you would end up creating some legal nonconformity, yeah.
Okay, so it would be be considered legal nonconforming, and any new use would have to.
Yeah, so what ends up happening is, it's sort of like the off-premise sign, because they change out the face, every 30 days. And so we basically say that you can change the face of the sign, provided that you don't alter the structure. Legal non-conforming structures, you can't alter those structures. And so, we've had that situation where off-premise sign, they want to put a digital board on there, and they add all this extra bracing, and you can't do that, So if somebody had a pole sign on Third Avenue West, they wanted to rehab it, and for whatever reason, they had to take it down, they couldn't replace it. Or they can't add structure to it to shore it up,
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
And then I think we should add Sixth Avenue as well.
Okay, going through Titusville right there? Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah, because it's gotten a lot of improvements to
Yeah.
it. and-
Yeah, I mean, it's the BRT route, yeah, that makes a
So
lot
it
of
ought
sense to me.
be added.
And so we're probably just from MLK back into downtown, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, exactly.
All right, yeah, I think that's a good add.
Okay, and we've got Richard Arrington Junior Boulevard, north and south, so the whole thing.
That's right.
Even though we let the mini storage incorporate a billboard into the structure.
Well, it was there, yeah, they kind of built a structure around it, which surprised me. But, yeah, they did.
And then we let the people rebuild the one up on the crest.
Well, it was, yeah, we had some issues with that one, because that was one of those
Well, that's
situations.
because the staff approved it, and then we
No,
couldn't
yeah,
unapprove
what
it.
happened was, so, yeah, I went round and round with that guy. He submitted plans probably 4 or 5 times. Every time he submitted a plan, I said, you're altering the structure, you can't do this. And so he finally submitted one that I would accept. I approved it, but the day I approved it, I went and took photographs of it. And then they went and installed the sign, and I went back, and they had added structure to it. And so, you know, they tried to get the electric turned on, and, you know, we put a stop work order on it. And so they had to go back out and take all that structure off, you know, so, but
Well, maybe it'll go ahead and fall down.
maybe.
We can pray. Okay, so we've added Sixth Avenue South. Okay. Oh, getting rid of signs that have become derelict. We have tons of derelict signs in our city.
Yep.
And I was reading the requirements for people to maintain their signs, but it wasn't really clear how we were going to get them down. Like, we tell them to get them down, and if they live in another state, they can thumb their nose at us, and then what are we gonna do?
Right, there is a process in here, for dealing with those signs, and I think it's based off of the state's, you know, the state has something similar. Where is that at in here? Oh, I guess it's under maintenance. Yeah, so it's section 15, non-conforming signs. And so there is a maintenance requirement and there's a removal procedure.
Because I think it's Jefferson Avenue that has about 50 of them on it that are just tattered and
Yeah.
rusted and awful looking.
Yeah, I think that's something we, you know, could do. So one of the things that we need to do as a part of this process is go out and actually survey all pole signs, so that we can establish legal nonconformity, right? And as part of that process, we'll be looking at the condition as well. So,
Well, some of them are billboards. They're small billboards.
may be.
And it used to be, when we had different employees, that every year, all those billboards were inspected.
that's right.
And, you know, like, people drove around and took pictures of them and everything.
That's right.
And then we caught the ones that weren't being used anymore and were just basically decaying on the roadside in our neighborhoods. But there's nothing in here about what the city can do when someone refuses to do anything. Like, we need to take them down.
Yeah,
Just
that's a
like
good
we
question.
remove junk cars out of people's personal private yards, and we tear down houses that have been left decaying in our neighborhoods. So these signs that are left decaying in our communities, you know, if the owner doesn't take them down, it should be the same thing where we take them down and put a lien on the property. And I didn't see that in here, and I really would like to see it because
Well, that's something we need to look at, you know, is condemnation, you know, what does the condemnation law say? Is it just housing or is it structures? We'll look into that, with the legal department and try to understand that.
there
Can
has
we-
to be a way.
Yeah, I guess the question is, can we condemn a sign and, you know, have the city remove it?
Surely we could.
Yeah, it may already be permissible based on the existing condemnation law. I'm not sure, but we'll check on that. That's a good question.
Yeah, because I think that needs to be included in our ordinance somehow, that the city has the right to do that.
Yeah, we'll check on that.
Oh, yeah, and, if we could add, going back to the,
List.
scenic corridor, if we could add Roebuck Parkway as well. Thank you.
Dr. Quinn, you haven't asked for anything to be added?
Oh, well,
You already
I've
got
got a
all-
big question, but I'm gonna wait until we get through the stuff that's in front of us, because my question is related to something that's not addressed in here.
Okay, something really big. Okay, so there was a question about the height above the sidewalk. Some signs were saying they have to be 8 feet above, and some signs were saying they have to be 10 feet above. And I was just wondering why we can't standardize.
It needs to be standardized. Yeah, I'll check and,
on
I'll do
something.
a search and make sure that it's uniform.
Yeah, because all of them have depths, and then they say, or half the sidewalk width, whichever is smaller. So that was consistent, but the heights above the sidewalks,
Right.
I think
I
are,
thought it was generally 8 feet, but we'll make sure.
there were 8-foot ones, and I think there were 10-foot ones. Okay. My big question is section 6 monument signs.
Okay.
Okay. Each occupant of a premise can have a monument sign for every 300 feet of street or highway frontage. So in D1, D2, D3, D4, all these, like each homeowner can have a monument sign in their front yard? Why?
Yeah, that's in there for churches.
Well, we need to say churches, because I can just imagine,
Yeah, I think what we should do is say, yeah, we can add a sentence
You don't
there.
want a monument sign that says Abbott Manor in your front yard?
Yeah, we'll add a sentence there that specifies within the single-family districts, it's limited to public buildings. And so that would be a church or school, fire department, those kind of things.
well, because it says the premise may display both pole and monument signs if no pole sign is more than 50 square feet in area. Who wants that in their residential neighborhood? And I'm not just talking about single family, like, D4, D5, D6. Who wants a bunch of damn signs in their neighborhood? Their residential neighborhood. I don't care if you're a church or not. You don't need a 50 square foot pole sign
Let's
in a
see.
neighborhood.
Yeah, you're jumping over to pole signs, yeah.
Well, no, this is well, it's under monument signs.
Well, monuments are not pole signs.
I know, but it says a premise may display both pole and monument signs if no pole sign is more than 50 square feet in area. You have that under monument signs.
Right, and I guess that's potentially possible, yeah.
Yeah,
But pole
well-
signs are not allowed in single-family districts.
Well, see, this
It's
This
confusing.
section 6 is a mess. And these signs don't need to be in residential neighborhoods.
Well, churches and schools have signs.
Well,
There-
then let's say churches and schools can
Well, but it
have,
also could be
a
a
sign.
fire station. I think public building is what describes those things.
no, don't call it public buildings.
Well, that's a misconception that you have.
Drug rehab
No, that's
will
not
be in
accurate.
there.
Public buildings are churches, schools, fire stations, police departments, community centers, those types of things.
And the definition is it's been paid for with public money. So if public
Right.
money has been given to the drug rehab people, then they will be allowed to have a big giant sign
That's not the
in
way we
front
interpret
yard.
that definition. That's not our interpretation.
Okay, we'll just move right along to, so this monument sign, its section just needs a whole lot of work, because I wouldn't vote for anything that had all this signage in residential neighborhoods.
Churches have signs.
Churches
They
can
do
have
right
signs,
now.
but not a monument sign and a pole sign.
Pole signs are not allowed in single-family districts.
Well, not everybody lives in a single-family district. Sometimes they live in multiple family districts.
Well, they're not allowed in multifamily districts.
And they
Pole
still-
signs are only allowed in C2, I1, I2.
Okay, well, then that premise may display both pole and monument signs, just needs to be fixed for all the residential.
We could say a premise located in a C2, I1, or I2 could have both.
Yeah, we just need to divide it up so no one thinks that they're going to be putting all these signs in residential neighborhoods. I mean, people deserve.
No, I agree. We definitely need a qualifier, and single-family districts are only allowed for public buildings.
Yeah, because each occupant of a premise can display a monument sign adjacent to the street that it has frontage on.
That's right.
That just doesn't belong in a residential area. Each occupant, we could have enough, it'd look like a cemetery. We'd each have a monument.
Like I
out
say,
front.
we're gonna add a sentence that clarifies that.
And a bunch of them will say Trump on them. So, okay, well, we're gonna fix that one. Okay, and then the setbacks for these monument signs, the 100 feet, the 75 feet, and the 50 feet. If you're adjacent.
That's when
to
you're adjacent, yeah.
Single-family or duplex residential use. How about any residential use?
Why did we move it up to make it closer?
So what now?
Why did we move it up to make it
Um,
closer?
It's just, I think it's kind of, the way it was written, it was sort of impractical. It sort of eliminated the ability to have a sign at all.
Gotcha.
So a church, that's in a neighborhood, so, oh, well, you can't meet the setbacks, you can't have a sign, you gotta get a variance. So they go get the variance, and they get the sign anyway, And so it's kind of like creating, cases that are really unnecessary.
Yeah.
So, but to your question though, Counselor Abbott, yeah, I don't know that it would be as important if it was an apartment complex that's next door, but I definitely think single family and duplex. Yeah, because if you said residential, that would add in multifamily. And then, to my mind, a multifamily is gonna have a monument sign.
Well, it depends on how big of a multifamily.
Yeah,
I mean, I have lots of
That's true. I mean, you might
apartments
have
in my district that have no monument signs.
right,
no
well, back in
pole
the day,
signs.
the only way you could have a sign on a multifamily is it could only be like 6 square feet, had to be attached to the building.
Well, good, let's keep it that way.
Yeah, that's the way it used to be, and,
I mean, if it's in a residential neighborhood, people just deserve not to be commercialized to death.
once
And
again,
basically,
these are gonna
when
be
we let all
churches and
these rental
schools.
things in, we have all these
Yeah.
signs all over everywhere. And we don't need it.
Yeah.
We've got enough mess that the city can't keep up with. I just don't see all these monument signs in any residential neighborhood.
They're there now.
Well, let's get rid of them.
Like, give an
So,
example. Can you give
so
an
churches
example?
can't have signs?
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah. So I tend to disagree, but I don't make the decision.
Well, I'm just to a point where I see our residential neighborhoods going to someplace I don't want them to go. If we don't take care of our residents, they'll leave. And if they leave, what happens to our city? And we're the ones, we hear the complaints from the residents because we go to our neighborhood meetings and hear them. So, whether it be Airbnb short-term rentals coming in and lousing up our neighborhoods or whatever other thing is coming in to ruin our neighborhoods, we've got too much of it going on. And this monument signs all over everywhere just does not seem like a good idea to me.
Well, they wouldn't be everywhere. They'd only be at churches or fire stations or, public buildings, schools,
Drug
things like that.
rehabs, yeah. Well, let's work on that one.
Yeah, like I say, we're gonna add a sentence that qualifies,
We need to shrink the sign size down
that would be,
too.
limited to single-family districts for public buildings only. Yeah, 80 square feet,
That's a big sign.
yeah, I mean, you could have something that's, 8 feet tall,
And 10 feet
10
wide.
feet wide,
That's too big.
maybe.
Burglars can hide behind them. You know, these signs are just too big to allow in a neighborhood. I don't care if it is a church, and I go to church, so I have great sympathy with churches, but they do not, I mean, most people can see a church when they run into one. I mean, they know what it looks like unless it moved into a house. And they still don't need an 80 square foot sign.
Oh, I see what's going on there, okay.
So let's just take care of our residents. We want them to stay. So let's just work on the monument sign section.
So what are you trying to see, Counselor Abbott?
Smaller signs.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll look at, the Oxmoor design guidelines and we have design guidelines for Eastwood Mall and for Crossplex. And I think they're fairly similar, as far as requirements. But I'll double check that, and compare and make a recommendation here. Cause I think in Oxmoor, retail locations, I think the largest monument there is like 40 or 50 square feet.
Yeah, these things are just ginormous.
Yeah, 80, honestly, I think 80's a little big myself. I
Yeah.
do.
Let's make it 20.
Well, yeah, so like,
That's a 4 foot by 5 foot sign that's big enough to advertise your church unless its name is really,
but that's
really long.
just for churches, so,
Well, fire stations.
well,
since we
but
don't
what
call them.
about the business, cause
We're
this,
not putting business in residential.
I'm not talking about residential district in
I am.
particular. I'm talking about other commercial locations, so, but I think we could have a delineation there, just like you're suggesting. I think we could have a smaller size for the single family and a larger size for commercial. And commercial doesn't necessarily have to be 80. I think it'd be closer to what the standard is in Oxmoor. And I think the retail locations out there is 40. But I'll double check that and
And
we'll make
we're
an adjustment.
talking about places that are next to single family or duplex residential. I think it just ought to be
Right, but you'll also
residential.
notice that the setback
Public
is
parks or
is
schools.
larger for different sizes.
Yeah.
But we'll make that we'll look at it and make an adjustment. I do think it makes sense to delineate between single-family churches and commercial. Makes total sense to me. And so it's just a question of what that number is. I think something like 60 in the commercial, something like 30 or so in the residential maybe, makes sense to me. I think the Oxmoor, the multifamily locations, I think the limitation there on square footage is around 30.
Yeah, and people are still finding things.
Sure.
Because, basically you've said that monument signs can't exceed 8 feet in height. 8 feet is
That's pretty
tall.
big.
That's a big, big sign.
Yeah, it is.
So
I agree.
they need to shrink down to about 4 feet. And like a grave marker. Okay, y'all, small blades and vertical blades. Is a small blade not vertical?
Yeah, I guess we just, yeah, they're all projecting signs. So they all project from the building. And then, so we're just saying a small blade, and so, yeah, let's look at the pictures. Because they are slightly different. The blade, I think, the small blade has a different purpose. And so if you flip over to the first page, you'll see a small blade sign. And so I think the purpose of this sign is really for somebody who's walking on a sidewalk. And so, you know, they're very small, they're really intended for a pedestrian scale.
Are you talking about South Pace?
It's the
First
second
Horizon,
page, it's
First
labeled
Horizon
small
has one in
blade
there.
on top of the
Yeah, yeah.
page. So it's the page after the Cornish sign.
That's a small blade?
That's a small blade.
Yeah.
The
Really?
brown that says First Horizon. And you can, now, the reason I put this picture is because you can kind of see it from both directions. You know, so you see how it projects, then you also see, if you were walking down the sidewalk, what it looks like as you approach it. And so it's, the point though is that there are small signs that are designed for pedestrians, you know, as you're walking down the sidewalk. And they're intended to be smaller. But, you know, a lot of people want to have a different type of projecting signs. You know, you think about like the Finnick, you know, they've got a big projecting sign in front of their property. Many, you know, I don't know, there's many of them around town. And so we've had to have multiple variances for blade signs because all we had in there was a small blade. You know, because we were just contemplating the pedestrian scale sign. But then you flip the page to the vertical blade and you'll see the South Pace sign that's attached to their building. And so that's a different type of projecting sign.
So, but we're gonna let each occupant of a premise have a small blade sign,
That's true.
no matter how many occupants there are? And that's in
No.
mixed use low, medium, high? What is MUD?
Mixed use downtown. Where we're
Downtown's
sitting.
where they make sense.
Yeah, they're really for more urban environments. That's generally where you see them, is urban environments or, you know, commercial properties like Summit. You know, you're walking down the sidewalk at the Summit and you got a little blade sign sticking out, you know, it says, you know, REI or whatever this way, you know. Yeah, but they're pedestrian oriented. I think that's the point, is that in the previous ordinance, the current ordinance, all we allow for is kind of the pedestrian style sign. But people want to have larger projecting signs. And so those have all been forced to go through a variance procedure. It's really not necessary. The South Pace sign, I'm sure it had a variance when it was built. It's been there many years. And actually, I think this one probably wouldn't, it might not fit the current ordinance. I think I'd have to read exactly what it says about the limitation on the height. So, and we've incurred, you know, it's happened multiple times where people, you know, want to have a blade sign, but they want it to be larger than the small blade. And they seek a variance. And, you know, I think they're unoffensive signs, they're good signs.
But you're gonna let each occupant of the building of a premise can have his or her own. That's gonna be a big stack of blades.
Where does it say that?
Yeah, it's,
B, vertical blade. Each occupant of a premise may display one vertical blade sign on each street or highway frontage in the following zone districts.
this section 8, it's in A, first sentence,
Yeah, I'm reading it.
yeah, and B, under vertical blade.
Yeah, we're gonna let everybody have one. It just seems like that's gonna be a mess. I mean, whose blade goes on top?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. We can probably just change that to each premises. But, you know, multi-tenant buildings, you know, I could see where you might have more than one.
Yeah, there's a limit on the square footage of signs you can have, and so it seems to me the signs, if everybody got to have one, the signs would get smaller and smaller and smaller, and then nobody could see them.
Right, no, that's not gonna happen.
But see, small blades can be 8 square feet, but the vertical blades, they can be 24 square feet.
That's right.
Well, if everybody's got one, where are you gonna put them?
Yeah, I think it goes the same way. It's each premises.
Instead of each occupant?
Yeah.
Because maybe a small blade could be each occupant, but my goodness, a vertical blade, you could have a stack. So do you know the size of this South Pay sign that you gave us the picture of?
I'd have to estimate, let's see, multi-tenant. Yeah, I think it's a little larger, potentially. Let's see.
Yeah, because 24 square feet, you could have a 4 foot by 6 foot
Yeah, I would say it's
sign sticking
probably,
It's in excess of 25 square feet.
yeah, it's probably a little large. That's what I said earlier, you know, this one probably still wouldn't meet the ordinance today, but similar style signs like this, that would be 24 square feet. So this may be a good example, that this is actually probably a little larger, because it's probably 16 feet tall, 2 to 3 feet wide.
That's
You know,
accurate.
so it's probably 36 square feet, something like that.
out. Okay, but we're only gonna let them be 18 inches.
We're gonna let them be 24 square feet, yeah,
24 square feet, but the maximum depth is 18 inches.
right, projection,
Which is like that much.
that's right.
Oh, yeah, and on the next page, which I guess is still talking about vertical blades. B, on the next page, it says that they have to clear sidewalks by at least 10 feet. So that's where the 10 feet.
Okay, that's the difference, yeah.
8 feet is the other height that we'll require signs to be clearing the sidewalk.
Yeah, I think, I need to double check. I think there's something about the tech code on that. And I think we changed it to sync up with the tech code.
So should we make them all 10 feet?
Right, if there's something in here that's not 10 feet, we
There's a
can
bunch of 8
fix
feet.
that.
8 footers.
Let's see. Okay, this one's 10, so the small blade is 10, the vertical blade is 10. I don't know that there's another one. Directory signs are attached. That may be the only instance of it. But I'll double check. And I know we changed it to fit the tech code, to be consistent with it. But I think those are the only two instances where that occurs.
Okay. And then we get to temporary signs.
Okay?
Okay. In residential districts, each occupant of a premise may display one temporary pole sign no larger than 6 square feet and no higher than 4 feet. The temporary pole sign shall be displayed no longer than 90 days a year and no more than twice each year. What is this for?
Political sign, for sale sign, those kinds of things.
But we take care of for sale signs.
Yeah, the real estate
Down.
stuff's in here as well, but political sign, that sort of thing.
90 days a year? That's 3 months. That's a quarter of the year you're gonna have these pole signs. This seems excessive to me. Campaign signs are 18 inches by what, 24 inches? So 6 square feet is huge. And then we're gonna have them out there a quarter of the year. I mean, there's no doubt about for sale signs. You can't sell your house, I guess, without a for sale sign. But
I think we'd have a problem if we said you couldn't have them at all.
probably.
Yeah.
But 90 days a year for
But we
6
can
square
regulate the
feet.
size and the duration.
So it's total of 90 days. So,
Right.
If I did it twice a year, I could only do it 45 days and 45 days.
That's right. That's what it says, yeah. But, of course, do you do it for 45 days, take it down for a day and put it back up for 45? You know, mean,
Who's gonna enforce?
I don't
any
know
of
that there's a
this,
huge
really?
proliferation of these things. This is a huge problem. But, I do know that, you know, the right is generally established for people to do this. But I do think we can control the size.
Yeah, I think that size is excessive.
Yeah, well, let me give you an example. I think of maybe what this is intended to address is like, you know, some people, there have been instances, and the one that comes to mind, in fact, was Glen Iris, where a disgruntled resident erected a sign in the yard that aired her grievances.
Yeah, there have been court cases on that.
Yeah. So,
There was a gentleman in St. Louis, Missouri that painted the front of his house with a message about the mayor.
right,
And I think he prevailed in court, which was shocking to me, but.
yeah. So, I think, you know,
I missed the Glen Iris one. Where was I?
I don't know.
Now, these were
It has
the
something to do with blue hair.
Okay, but those were using even language that I don't think is allowed in public.
Well, and yeah, that's another thing, and I think that, you know, we can't regulate content,
Right.
you know, so we can't tell them what they can put on the sign, you know, and, which is challenging. Yeah, I think you probably remember the billboard that was advertising the sugar daddy thing over by the airport. You know, we can't control that, you know, even though it's, you know, sort of vulgar, you know.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that we could allow maybe 3 square foot signs, not 6.
Yeah, I think we can adjust the size. Like I say, we can regulate the size. We can do that. We
Yeah,
can't,
because yard signs are, you know, in your own yard.
yeah, you know, yard
Or-
sale
or-
today, you know, that kind of
Yeah,
thing, or,
part of life, but gigantic signs. I mean, if somebody put a 4x8 in their front yard.
yeah, right.
It's
And so this is 6 square feet, but I think we could reduce it if you want. I don't have a problem with it. Like I
Well,
say,
it
I think
seems
we
to
can
me
regulate the size.
That would conform to the standard size of a yard sign. Not that you can't buy bigger, but
Yeah.
if
And what did you
want-
say that typical that size was?
I think it's 3
for like-
square feet. It's 18 inches by 24, I think, is a standard yard sign.
So that would be a little bigger than 3 square feet.
Yeah.
Well, maybe,
Yeah, I was thinking about saying 4 square feet and maybe limit the height to 3 or something like that.
Yeah. Let's try that.
Okay. And you can see, I mean, we went from 60 to 90 on the duration. I don't know what the justification was for that, but,
I don't either. I'd like to go back to 60.
yeah. Okay.
I mean, why 90? We just have to look at ugly signs for more time.
Yeah.
And I just want to keep our residents in Birmingham. I'm just hell-bent that we keep the ones we've got, not chase them all off with our stupid decisions. And plus, we know nobody's going to enforce anything, so that even makes it more anxiety-producing. And then you've got construction site signage where they put the signs on the fence screens.
Yeah, it's fairly typical, I think. You know, sometimes, you know, you'll end up seeing them where the entire thing is covered. You know, it's just like one giant, I mean, I know there was one downtown at one time that was wrapped around a half a block. And so you had like 300 feet of signage on the fence. And so we included this 25%, you know, to reduce that kind of situation. And once again, they're temporary, you know, for construction sites.
some construction sites. But I see that we are making them take them down if the construction is discontinued
That's right.
for more than 60 days.
That's right. And so currently, we really don't have good standards on that at all, and so it's, I mean, we've, sort of enforced something we didn't have,
Yeah.
There have been situations where we've asked people to, reduce the amount of signage on the fence, and they've complied.
So what about, if I remember correctly, we had, it's the building next to the New Ideal building. I think Creature did that redevelopment, the construction on that redevelopment. And I want to say their construction fencing had mesh on it that had the repeating motif of
Right.
Creature
Creature
on it.
symbol.
So would that repeating design be allowed as long as it didn't occupy 25% of the square footage?
I think that's what this is saying, yeah,
Okay,
that's right. I think his are black with the
Yeah.
white symbol.
yeah,
Well, and then you had the Brown Marks building that was under construction for 4 years with its fencing out there. I don't know whether they had any signs on it, but what a mess.
Yeah, it was a mess.
And apparently, we were incapable of doing anything about it.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know what the situation was, they have to have if it's in a right of way, they have to have a barricade permit.
Yeah, and they just kept it that way for
Well,
years and years.
Yeah, I know we had an issue with Alabama Power at the steam plant, trying to get our sidewalk back, and so, yeah, that happens on occasion. Where
But
the
it didn't have any signage on it.
construction drags out.
Okay, and the realtors, the only complaints I've gotten about realtor signs is when they don't put them on the property that is being sold, they stick them out on the rights of way and, dig a big hole for their 4x4 signs
Yeah.
saying, go that way. And
Yeah, they have to be on their property. I know there was one in Oxmoor that I got a complaint about where it was placed in right of way, and it was just what you're describing. It's like at an intersection, turn left to see, XYZ, and so, yeah, we had to have that one removed. We worked with, zoning enforcement to have it removed.
So once the council passes this and this goes into effect, are we gonna do some type of signage campaign? Or we go around and inspect the signs and educate businesses about the new ordinance?
Right, so we have shared this with the primary sign companies that we deal with on a regular basis.
Okay.
So they've had, I think, 2 or 3 opportunities to review this and make comments. They really didn't have a lot of comments, it was kind of surprising to me.
Yeah,
I think they just want to know what they have to do,
yeah.
But yeah, so we've had some outreach to the sign companies already. We probably would notify them, once, new sign ordinance in effect.
Okay,
Yeah, so we would notify the sign companies of that.
okay, thank you.
Yep.
And you said there's a zoning, who's gonna enforce the ordinance, or who usually enforces the
Yeah, it would be
ordinance?
zoning enforcement,
Zoning enforcement?
or
Okay.
zoning inspectors, yes.
Okay. How many inspectors do we have?
Zoning inspectors, we have 5. There's a supervisor and 4 zoning inspectors,
Okay,
and they're all part of code enforcement.
okay,
Yeah, we've combined all the different code
Yeah.
enforcement components into one.
okay, thank you.
I'm thinking ahead here. So, one of the things that I think under consideration, some places are already doing this with respect to code enforcement and why it's important to have these sort of standards. So I can envision a time in the not too distant future where we have cameras on our garbage trucks
Yeah.
that are inventorying, everything around it as they pass down the street. And, those systems, you can use AI to process those images and, number one, if you're doing that on a regular basis, you're documenting the presence of a sign. You can do AI to, say it's of a certain size. But, I'm just thinking in the future, we could use systems like that to augment our code enforcement. So,
We can be proactive instead of reactive.
yeah, I mean,
I think it's a good idea. I know I read about a city that was doing something similar with building conditions. They were using a similar
Yeah.
system, using AI to do
Well-
a building condition analysis as the trash truck's going down the street.
right, I know there's been some conversation with at least one company that's done a demonstration in the city of Birmingham.
Yeah.
Using that type of system.
I think it'd be great, because we're planning on going out and starting to do another land use survey, and we'll do building conditions as we go. And so, yeah, that's a lot of manpower. We're planning on putting out, 8 teams of 3, So we'll have an AM, PM shift 4 days a week. To go out and do land use survey with building conditions and signs. So, yeah, that could save a lot of manpower.
You mean we could enforce our property maintenance code? What?
Right.
Well, those inspectors are out there every day,
Send them over to my neighborhood.
and they take people to court on a regular basis. Yeah, they're working.
As far as non-conforming signs are concerned, we have to wait for them to try to do something with the sign before, like, for instance, if people have flashing lights and things that are not allowed, like the brightness, the ambient conditions, adjustments, the malfunctioning signs. We've already got some out there, like the one that's next to Magnolia Park when you're coming out of town headed for Homewood on 22nd. There's a building right by Magnolia Parks. What is that, the east
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
corner?
Right
and
before you go up the hill, across from
Yeah,
Shoal.
it's so bright, it just blinds you when you come through that intersection. And I assume we've never been able to do anything about it, but with these requirements for them to, have adjustments for ambient conditions, is there any way to make existing signs that are a problem come into some kind of compliance?
I think our existing ordinance says something about that. I don't know that part of this ordinance has changed much. And I believe going back several years, we had something in there. So that sign doesn't predate our big sign ordinance change in 94. That sign was added, I'd say, within the last 10, 15 years at the most.
It's very.
I know the sign you're talking about.
Very bright and very distracting. I'm surprised nobody's crashed into their building.
22nd and 11th.
And I know that, I realize that's not something you changed in the ordinance, but
Right.
that
Well,
was
the
just.
point being, though, that if it's been a problem, we could control it through the ordinance. Because I don't think we need to double check, but I'm pretty sure that sign has been installed within the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, and but its brightness is the problem. They
Right,
need to,
understood.
turn it down.
Now, I know I know exactly the one you're talking about. Right across from Brother Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also known as Magnolia Park,
Oh, really?
also known as, AKA. Okay, Dr. O'Quinn, we're to your question that's not in here.
Yeah, okay, so, you didn't have any more questions about the exempt signs and, because we didn't get that far along?
Yeah, that was probably the last section.
Oh my goodness, I turned too many pages with, I really didn't have a lot of questions about the exempt signs, shocking as it may be.
It's very extensive and thorough.
But I would like to know what a feather sign is. That's on that first,
Yeah, that's those, you see those, it's kind of like a flexible pole that.
it looks like a sail that they
Yeah,
forgot to put the
yeah,
whole thing
exactly.
there.
Yeah,
That's a
those kinds of things.
Those are illegal?
This will prohibit them, yeah.
Good. How about those things that you put the blower in?
Yeah, that's listed in here too,
Do
you know.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
What is that called?
Well, we are calling it an inflatable sign or a sign that have movement or powered by airflow.
Okay,
That's what I put down. I mean, I didn't know how to describe it.
well, I didn't either, but they
Yeah.
certainly are distracting.
Yeah, they're problematic. I don't like them. You know, we've had people ask, you know, you're gonna grand opening, they wanna have a purple gorilla, something weird, you know, just to draw attention. When they opened Grandview, you know, they wanted to have like searchlights, you know, I mean, just flooding the sky with light, you know. So, yeah, people get really out of control with some of that stuff.
Rent Monster, I think they,
Who?
Rent Monster, 4th Avenue South, 41st Street. I think he does a inflatable in
Does he?
front of his office.
An inflatable monster.
Yeah.
It's purple.
I think I saw some kind of big skeleton on top of the Black Market Bar and Grill or something the other day.
Yeah.
That's one that, you know, needs to go away. You
Yeah.
know, it's silly. I mean, it draws attention, I guess. But,
Yeah,
you know, make a better burger. People want to go there.
right.
Well, if they went to the one in Five Points, the food is about the same as it is in its new location.
I imagine it is, yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you're a fan of that place, you'll go there.
Less homeless people hanging around, but, you know, same food,
Yeah,
same recipe, same cook. He probably moved with them.
sure.
Okay, so
Yeah.
anything on here about the prohibited and exempt signs? I like the fact that signs carried by a person when the person does not receive any financial compensation are okay.
So,
All those people jumping around on the right of way next to a major highway with a sign are illegal, cause we know they're not doing it for free. Not in this weather.
yeah, maybe we need in our definition section, add a definition for portable signs because, you know, I know another variation of signage is moving billboards, you know, so trucks that are specifically designed.
Yeah, that is in here. We do have a definition for portable sign, but there is, I think in the general, let's see, where is it at? Yeah, there's general requirements for all signs. I forget where it is, general requirements. So under general requirements, it's, I guess under section 4, signs must not be attached or painted to or painted onto a vehicle for the primary purpose of advertising.
Where's this?
Section 4.
Yeah, that's under section 4.
I'll tell you which page it was on.
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have page numbers on here, it's silly on my part, but, yeah, under section 4, general requirements, just after the definitions, if you flip over one page, you'll see number 7, signs attached, signs must not be attached to or painted onto a vehicle for the primary purpose of advertising.
But they are allowed to identify the business that
Yeah,
owns the truck.
exactly.
Section 4, number what?
7,
Yeah, I would add maybe something that is inclusive of digital signage, you know, illuminated signage.
yeah, I remember there was somebody that was doing it for a short period of time around here. They were driving around with a flatbed or something, and they did it for a short period of time, but, they ended up going away.
I mean, you know, it's actually, it's gonna be problematic, you know, because you
They
got
can drive
18-wheelers driving around with trailers that have, you know, essentially a billboard on the side of it, so, you know,
Yeah,
in any case, but the vehicles that I'm thinking about, you know, are a product that's being marketed for a specific purpose.
And it's like a digital screen, it's like a giant TV.
Right.
yeah, I
That's
saw one of
yeah.
those, yeah, that was the one I remember. Somebody was doing that for a short period of time.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're like rolling billboards.
They would drive up 280 during rush hour and stuff like that, yeah.
You know, to be just completely transparent, I don't really have like a strong opinion, you know, about it, but, you know, if we're trying to make sure that our ordinance is complete,
No, we can add something on that, because to me, they're distracting too, they're dangerous. And I think that's probably the biggest problem with it is, you know, public health issue.
And
Okay.
that's the same problem with the billboards that have the changing screens.
Right.
It's like you get distracted. It's like watching television. You
Yep.
go, oh,
Yeah,
I
they're
might
too
need
bright,
some of that.
or
And then
they
you-
switch too often. Yeah, and it'll catch your eye, yeah,
Yeah, and then you drive into someone else's
Yeah.
lane
exactly.
and embarrass yourself. Okay, are we to the
Sure.
issue that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've thought about for a long time and wished we could make some accommodation for in our ordinance is, you know, in recent years, seen these in other cities, and if you go to any sort of, you know, conference or show like the International Downtown Association show, you'll see these products being marketed, but they're digital kiosk that are intended to be installed in public right-of-way, and most of them have a touch screen surface that where, you know, someone can walk up to it and, you know, get public information.
Yeah,
But the way that they work is that they sell advertising
right.
on there, and so, you know, it's a bit of a trade-off. But
Yeah.
you know, these are expensive pieces of equipment and would be prohibitive, you know, just, you know, for the city to do on its own. You know, we're probably not gonna install a $50,000, you know, piece of equipment
Right.
in public right of way, so somebody can have a map or a list of phone numbers and so on and so forth. But anyway, I've thought that, you know, there are certain applications where allowing for this could be helpful. So there is an exception currently in our ordinance that allows advertising at transit stops. Okay, so essentially, if BJCTA wants to take advantage, you know, of that as a revenue generating opportunity, they have the ability to do so. But that doesn't incorporate other places, other public spaces. And so one of the big ones that jumps out to me where this type of signage, if you want to call it a sign, but I mean, according to the definition that we have here, it's a sign. But City Walk would be one of those high volume pedestrian locations where having a digital kiosk, but a lot of times, you know, these have multiple functionality where they're, you know, an emergency call box as well. They often have cameras that are, you know, monitoring, you know, that could be connected to the real-time crime center. There may be environmental monitors, you know, that are evaluating air quality, you know, but it's something that, you know, I've experienced going to other places that, you know, has been helpful, and I think there, you know, I would like to see us think about that, and whether it's, you know, only City Walk or if we can think of, other locations like some of our destination parks, that also have high volume. I would like to see us, make some accommodation for that where at least it's possible. And part of the reason why I think this is important is that I'm aware of at least one local business owner that would like to, provide the equipment free of charge to the city of Birmingham, but the only way it works is if, they can have the advertising on there that basically pays for it,
For the maintenance and upkeep.
Yeah,
Interesting. Yeah, 'cause I know the city code, talks about advertising in the right of way. So, people that put stuff up on a telephone pole so I think it's very conservative, very limiting. So I think city code probably would have to be amended as well. I think it's kind of a bigger conversation maybe.
okay, so that would be outside of this
I
zoning
think
code.
that, yeah, I think, cause generally speaking, this regulates private property. So we really
Okay.
don't regulate the right of way.
Okay,
The city code, I think, generally regulates the right of way. So if you have like when we do have projecting signs that project into the right of way, they always have to get a right of way use agreement,
right,
to be in the right of way.
okay, all right,
Yeah. And
Fair
so,
enough.
but we'll have to, I think we'll have to talk to OCA about that and kind of, see, it makes sense to me. It's kind of like a wayfinding sign,
right,
but it's just got more information. Although on the one hand, I think, well, don't everybody have a kiosk in their pocket, in a way, I mean, you got a map in your pocket, you can look up, but anyway, I mean, it makes sense, I guess, in a way, especially like you say, City Walk, Railroad Park, places like that. It does make sense, I think.
Yeah, I don't think we'd want them all over the city, cause Fairfield tried those street markers that had the advertising, they look like, you know what?
Yeah, and advertising is a little challenging sometimes, but I think we'd have to just have a conversation about that with the city attorney, I think,
okay,
and, others, I'm sure.
right. I mean, on the opposite end of the spectrum, something that's also falls into the advertising in the public right-of-way category are sandwich boards, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, generally those are not allowed.
They're not allowed,
They're not-
but we
they're
see
out
them all
there.
over the place.
Yeah, they're out there, but they are not allowed. Yeah, that's true. And it goes back to the city code on that, yeah.
Yeah,
In some places, they see it as a benefit, Personally, they don't bother me, but I know it's not allowed by our city code.
our neighborhood associations are buying them and advertising their neighborhood meetings in the public right-of-way.
Oh, really?
Oh, jeez.
Well,
Ours are in people's yards. But the traffic engineer took them all up one year, whether they were in somebody's yard or not, because they were illegal street signs.
Sandwich boards or neighborhood announcement signs?
Ask Crestwood. It was interesting. Anyway, well, so we've come up with a number of different changes, so I think that probably we should have this be the meeting we're taking it under advisement.
Yeah.
And y'all could make the changes we've talked about, and then if we think of any more, like if committee members think of other things, I think we should just email
sure.
Tim and
Yeah.
copy the other members of the
Yeah,
committee, so
that
we'll all
works.
know what each other are thinking.
Sure. Yeah, we can come back next time with the amendments from today.
Yeah,
I guess that's what you would prefer.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
that would be a good idea, and unless we wanted to have our next iteration of the sign ordinance changes at a committee of the whole, if the president thinks that people will be interested in signs.
Do we want to do that before, do we want to have it come back to this committee before we send
I
it to
think if
committee of the
all-
whole?
To me, if all the changes that we've talked about today are made and anything else that comes to mind, because I've read this over 3 times, but I'll bet if I read it a 4th time, I'd see something. Because
Yeah.
the more times you look at anything, the more stuff you see.
Sure.
So, but I would think that with the changes we've made today, and then if anybody thinks of anything in the next few weeks, that we could just add it to the committee of the whole, assuming that all members of the council would be interested in knowing what we're gonna do with I know Counselor Hoyt was always inspired over the convenience stores that plastered their windows with all these hideous signs
Right.
and made them look like, a
Yeah,
mess.
this limits them to 15%.
15%.
Right.
So, yeah, that's fine with me. I'll need you guys to help remind us to advertise the committee of the whole meeting as a joint planning and zoning committee meeting,
Okay.
so that we don't encounter the same situation that we
Right.
had.
Well, yeah, I agree. Or, I was sitting here thinking about that myself. I mean, I guess, potentially, you could make a recommendation today with the amendments, if you chose. Or we could do what you're suggesting, have a joint meeting and take a vote at that time. But I guess the question then would be, when would it be? Because, so we're already 6 days away from the next committee of the whole. So I think, don't you have to advertise 7 days prior? So that would put us into the,
Well,
August.
we're supposed to have one every 2 weeks, like 2 a month, so.
oh, I
Planning
thought
and
committee of the
zoning.
whole was once a month.
Yeah, committee of the whole is once a month, planning and zoning is twice a
Twice.
month.
Right.
I was forgetting, we used to have committee of the whole twice a month. But,
Could we place an item on the agenda for next Tuesday still?
As far as I'm concerned, yes. I haven't checked with my team yet to see
What else is on there?
what else is on there, but
Because that'd be ideal if we could meet next Tuesday and then come back here the following Wednesday. We could get out of B and Z before the end of July
yeah,
rather than August.
and since we're not trying to have the committee of the whole right after the council meeting when everybody's eyes are glazed over and they don't care about anything anymore, that should help, because this is dry.
Yeah, it is.
It's dry and needs pictures, little drawings, signs. Anyway, I think we've done a good job today, and I think if we make these changes, then our colleagues will not notice as many things
Right.
that they have questions about. But that, the one that really kind of blew me away was everybody in residential neighborhoods having a monument sign in their front yard.
Yeah, that needs to be
I was
fixed.
just imagining how that was going to look
Yeah, that's one of those unintended consequences.
and what the monuments were going to say. That was even better. Like a marquee, you change the message every,
You wouldn't want one in your yard?
no. I would let vines grow on it. It would be covered up.
well, I'm thinking about, you go up to, Mentone, and every driveway has, Big Buck Ranch, or,
Yeah.
the Grassy Knoll, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Tomatoes for sale, or, yeah.
Yeah, so they've got each location, named,
I'd have to think about
Anyway.
my name for a while. Anything else that we need to discuss? We have old and new business, and I don't have any of either one. So, okay, well then,
well, I guess we can ask, so we have a draft, short-term rental ordinance that's been distributed, so what's the plan in terms of bringing it before this committee?
Yeah, so it'll be on ZAC on July 16th, the zoning advisory committee for their recommendation. And then it would come to this committee the next Wednesday.
Okay,
So whatever that is, the 24th.
okay.
if it survives the public hearing,
Yeah, it'll be
Okay.
interesting to see what happens there.
It will be interesting.
Yeah.
Wait, there's gonna be a public hearing before it comes to
No,
council?
the ZAC is a public hearing.
Oh, gotcha.
On the 16th.
That's right.
Okay.
That's the meeting, and, you know, I know that there are a lot of opinions, and I certainly have mine. I've got so many of those things in my neighborhood, it's just an embarrassment to society. And the fact that we've fooled around for so long waiting for there to be more so that we can collect more fees is just, anyway, is everyone ready to adjourn?
I move for adjournment.
Second?
We are adjourned.
All right, thank you.